In the small town of Glastonbury, Vermont, there was a tale that sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest locals. Late one night, Officer Daniels, a seasoned cop with over 2 decades on the force, was patrolling the desolate roads leading into the wilderness. It was a foggy, moonless night and visibility was almost non-existent. Around midnight, Daniels received a strange call on his radio, a voice whispering, "Help, lost, cold." The transmission was faint and filled with static, but the distress was palpable. Daniels immediately reported it to dispatch, but they had no record of any calls coming through. Undeterred, he decided to investigate. Following the voice, Daniels found himself on a narrow dirt path that seemed unfamiliar despite his years patrolling the area. As he drove deeper into the woods, the radio static grew louder until it suddenly cut out, replaced by an eerie silence. His headlights caught sight of a figure on the side of the road, a man in an old police uniform, waving for help. Daniels stopped the car and got out, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Are you all right?" he called out. The figure nodded but didn't speak. As Daniels approached, he noticed something was off. The uniform was from a bygone era, the kind worn by officers in the 1950s. The man pointed down the path, urging Daniels to follow. Cautiously, Daniels walked alongside the ghostly figure, who moved without a sound. They reached a clearing where an abandoned, rusted patrol car sat, half buried in the overgrowth. The spectral officer pointed to the car, then vanished. Heart-pounding, Daniels approached the vehicle and peered inside. To his horror, he saw the skeletal remains of a man still gripping the steering wheel, the decayed badge on his chest matching the uniform of the ghostly figure. Daniels quickly radioed for backup, but the response was delayed due to the remote location. As he waited, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The temperature dropped and he heard whispers in the wind, indistinguishable yet chilling. When backup finally arrived, they retrieved the remains and conducted an investigation. The bones were identified as those of Officer Tom Riley, who had gone missing in 1957 while on duty. Despite an extensive search at the time, he was never found. Daniels' encounter with the ghostly patrolman became a local legend, a haunting reminder of the unresolved mysteries that lurk in the shadows. In the rural outskirts of Louisiana, Sheriff Johnson had heard countless stories of strange occurrences, but none matched the chilling encounter he had one humid summer night. It was during a routine patrol when he noticed a figure standing by the side of the road, hitchhiking. The man wore a deputy's uniform, but something about him seemed off. Johnson stopped and rolled down his window. "You need a ride, deputy?" he asked. The man nodded, his face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. "I need to get to the old Blackwell plantation," the deputy said in a low, raspy voice. Johnson hesitated. The Blackwell plantation was abandoned and known for its dark history. Nevertheless, he agreed, driven by curiosity and a sense of duty. As they drove, the deputy was eerily silent, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Johnson attempted to make conversation, but the responses were curt and vague. When they arrived at the plantation, the deputy simply said, "Thank you," and stepped out of the car, disappearing into the shadows. Johnson felt uneasy and decided to follow. As he approached the dilapidated house, he heard faint whispers and saw flickering lights inside. He pushed open the creaking door and entered, his flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. In one of the rooms, he found an old photograph of a deputy standing next to the sheriff from decades ago. The man in the photo was the same one he had just given a ride to. Heart racing, Johnson searched the house but found no sign of the deputy. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him and turned to see the figure standing in the doorway. "Leave this place," the deputy said, his voice now a hollow echo. Johnson backed away, stumbling over debris, and rushed out of the house. As he reached his patrol car, he glanced back and saw the deputy standing on the porch watching him with lifeless eyes. Shaken, Johnson returned to the station and did some research. He discovered that the deputy in the photograph, Deputy Marshall, had died tragically at the Blackwell plantation in the 1920s while investigating a series of murders. His spirit was said to haunt the property, forever seeking justice for the unsolved crimes. In the heart of the Nevada desert, near an abandoned mining town, Officer Lisa Mitchell was on a solo night patrol. She had been assigned to this remote area for several months now, and while it was usually uneventful, tonight felt different. The isolation of the desert was both a blessing and a curse. It was a quiet post, but the desolation could be unnerving. The vast emptiness seemed to amplify every sound, every shadow. On this particular night, Mitchell received a call about strange lights seen near the old Henderson mine. The caller had sounded genuinely frightened, which was unusual for the locals. Curiosity piqued, she drove out to the location. The drive was long and lonely, the road winding through the barren landscape. The mine had been closed for decades and its entrance was sealed with rusty chains and padlocks. It was a place that locals avoided, shrouded in mystery and fear. As she arrived, she saw faint flickering lights emanating from deep within the mine shaft. They seemed to beckon her, inviting her to uncover their source. Ignoring the chill that ran down her spine, she decided to investigate. She knew it was her duty, but there was also a part of her that was driven by sheer curiosity. She squeezed through a gap in the fence and made her way into the mine, the air growing colder and more oppressive with each step. The walls seemed to close in around her, the darkness almost tangible. The lights seemed to dance just out of reach, drawing her deeper into the darkness. They flickered and moved, as if they were alive, leading her further into the unknown. Suddenly, her flashlight flickered and died, plunging her into complete darkness. She was left with only the eerie glow of the mysterious lights to guide her. A sense of dread washed over her as she heard soft, shuffling footsteps echoing through the tunnels. The sound was faint but unmistakable, sending chills down her spine. "Is anyone there?" she called out, her voice trembling. The silence that followed was deafening, amplifying her fear. There was no response, only the growing sense of being watched. It was as if unseen eyes were following her every move, scrutinizing her. She fumbled for her radio, but it was dead, no signal this far underground. The realization that she was completely cut off from the outside world intensified her anxiety. Mitchell continued, driven by a mixture of fear and determination. She couldn't turn back now. She had to find out what was causing the lights. She rounded a corner and found herself in a large cavern. The space was vast and echoing, the air thick with an unidentifiable tension. In the center was an old lantern, its flame flickering weakly. It cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Surrounding it were tattered, blood-stained clothes and scattered bones, the remnants of those who had entered the mine and never left. The sight was both horrifying and heartbreaking. As she examined the gruesome scene, she felt a cold breath on her neck and spun around to find herself face to face with a shadowy figure. It was a moment of pure terror. The entity had no discernible features, just a dark, menacing presence that filled her with paralyzing fear. It seemed to absorb the light around it, making the darkness even more profound. It reached out a hand and she felt an icy grip on her arm. The touch was cold and unnatural, sending a jolt of fear through her body. Terrified, Mitchell broke free and ran, the shadowy figure in pursuit. Her heart pounded in her chest as she navigated the dark, twisting tunnels. She could hear its footsteps growing closer, feel its presence right behind her. The fear was overwhelming, driving her to run faster. She burst out of the mine and into the night, gasping for breath. The cool night air was a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere inside the mine. The lights in the mine flickered one last time before vanishing, leaving her in silence. The sudden stillness was almost as unsettling as the encounter itself. Back at the station, she reported the encounter, but few believed her story. Her colleagues were skeptical, attributing her experience to stress and overactive imagination. The Henderson mine remained a place of dark legends, a silent watcher waiting for its next victim. The locals continued to avoid it, their fear rooted in generations of eerie tales. For Mitchell, the memory of that night would forever haunt her, a reminder of the unseen terrors lurking in the dark corners of the world. It was a night that changed her, leaving her with a lingering sense of unease and a story that few would ever believe. Like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories.